27 years ago, a young nun named Sarah was forced to leave her convent under mysterious circumstances. The official story claimed she left by choice, but a hidden diary revealed otherwise. They forced me to leave because I saw what I shouldn't have. Now, years later, a friend uncovers the chilling truth: an underground room, a missing recording, and a secret that was never meant to surface. The late October wind swept through the small streets of Middlebury, Vermont, rustling the brittle leaves that clung stubbornly to the trees. Emma Callahan hunched deeper into her scarf as she crossed Main Street, her breath forming thin clouds in the crisp afternoon air. It had been years since she'd set foot in this town, a place once alive with youthful memories, now faded like the old storefronts that lined the narrow road. Her visit was unplanned. She was here to settle her late aunt's affairs and, on a whim, wandered into an antique store tucked between a shuttered bakery and a boarding house. The small bell above the door chimed softly as Emma entered. The shop smelled faintly of aged paper, cedarwood, and a hint of lavender, a scent that tugged at some long-forgotten corner of her mind. The proprietor, an older woman with silver hair tied in a loose bun, looked up from behind the counter and smiled. "Take your time, dear," she said warmly. Emma offered a polite nod and began browsing through shelves stacked with old trinkets, faded postcards, and worn books. As her fingers traced the spines of leather-bound volumes, her gaze landed on a small, unassuming box labeled Miscellaneous Stationery. Something about it called to her. With a gentle tug, she pulled the box down and sifted through its contents: old pens, brittle envelopes, a tarnished letter opener. And then her hand paused. Beneath a stack of yellowed notepaper lay a slim navy blue notebook, its edges frayed and cover softened by time. Curious, Emma picked it up. The initials SM were embossed faintly on the cover. Her pulse quickened. Sarah Mitchell. The name surged into her mind like a wave. Sarah had been her closest friend during their years at St. Bridget's Academy, a brilliant, gentle soul who had chosen a life of devotion, entering the convent at barely 20. The last Emma had heard, Sarah had voluntarily left the order almost 8 years ago. The reasons were vague, the timing abrupt, and no one had heard from her since. The official explanation was that Sarah had decided to pursue personal growth outside the church. But even then, Emma had suspected there was more beneath the polished words. She sat on a nearby bench, heart pounding, and opened the notebook. Inside were pages filled with Sarah's familiar handwriting, neat, deliberate, tinged with a certain urgency. Emma flipped through entries about daily prayers, reflections on scripture, occasional notes about tending to the sick and elderly. The tone was serene, until it wasn't. Near the middle of the notebook, a stark change in pen pressure caught Emma's eye. One entry was dated exactly 8 years ago, the very day Sarah had supposedly left the convent. The handwriting was shaky, as if written in haste or distress. Emma read the line aloud under her breath, voice trembling. "They forced me to leave because I saw what I should not have seen." The words echoed in her mind, louder with each repetition. Emma blinked hard, her throat tightening. She glanced again at the date, the same date stamped on the official church letter declaring Sarah's departure. What had Sarah witnessed, and why had she been silenced? Emma's mind whirled. She needed to know more. There was no address, no further elaboration in the notebook, just that one chilling sentence. But it was enough to reignite the unanswered questions that had haunted her for years. As she closed the notebook, her hands shaking slightly, the shopkeeper approached. "Quite a find, isn't it?" she remarked, peering at the worn cover. Emma nodded slowly. "Yes, it belonged to an old friend." "Well, sometimes these things find their way to those who need them," the woman said with a knowing smile. Emma paid for the notebook, had left the store, her steps unsteady. Outside, the wind had picked up, scattering the leaves across the sidewalk like frantic whispers. Sitting in her car, Emma stared at the notebook resting on the passenger seat. Her breath caught in her throat. The quaint, sleepy town of Middlebury no longer felt so innocent. Something was hidden beneath its polished surface, and Sarah's voice, preserved in faded ink, was now calling out to be heard. Emma pulled out her phone. She still had contacts from their academy days, people who might remember, might know where Sarah had gone or what had driven her away. Determined, she dialed the first number. The line rang, unanswered. She tried another. No luck. Finally, On the third call, a familiar voice answered. It was Father Daniel, one of their old mentors at the academy. "It's been so long. What's this about?" Emma hesitated only a moment before replying, her voice low and urgent. "It's about Sarah. I found something I think you need to see." As she ended the call, Emma knew this was only the beginning. Whatever had happened to Sarah was still buried in shadows, but Emma was no longer willing to look away. Emma drove through the winding roads leading out of Middlebury, the weight of the notebook on the passenger seat a constant reminder of her purpose. The call with Father Daniel had been brief. He had sounded cautious, almost guarded, but agreed to meet her the next morning at the rectory. That left her the evening to do some research on her own. Back at her aunt's house, she settled in with her laptop and a steaming mug of coffee, heart still racing from what she had found. Her first instinct was to check the official website of St. Bridget's Academy and the convent associated with it. According to a small press release dated 8 years ago, Sister Sarah Mitchell had been called to serve in a different community to further her vocational growth and commitment to the church's outreach programs. It sounded polished, impersonal. There was no mention of which community, no forwarding location, no contact information. A deliberate omission. Emma couldn't shake the feeling that the statement was designed to end inquiry rather than invite it. She dug deeper, searching diocesan bulletins, parish newsletters, anything that might list transfers of clergy or religious sisters. Nothing. Sarah's name vanished after that single announcement. Frustrated, Emma leaned back in her chair, eyes burning from the screen. Why would there be no record of where Sarah had gone? In most cases, such moves were well documented, if only to inform the faithful. This was a deliberate erasure. She picked up the notebook again, running her fingers over the worn cover, as if willing Sarah's voice to guide her next step. Suddenly, a memory surfaced. Sarah had once volunteered at a local elder care facility during their academy days. She used to talk about the residents there, the dignity in caring for the forgotten elderly. Maybe someone there had seen her. Without hesitation, Emma grabbed her coat and drove to St. Augustine's retirement home on the outskirts of town. The brick building looked unchanged, its modest structure softened by the creeping ivy along its walls. Inside, the receptionist, a kind-faced woman named Margaret, was met with a warm smile. Emma introduced herself and asked if she might speak to someone who had worked there 8 years ago. Margaret hesitated, but sensing the urgency in Emma's voice, made her to the staff lounge where an older nurse was sipping tea. "This is Nancy," Margaret explained. "She's been with us forever. If anyone remembers, it be her." Nancy looked up, curiosity in her eyes. Emma wasted no time. "I'm trying to find information about a friend, Sarah Mitchell. She was a nun, but she left her convent suddenly about 8 years ago. I heard she might have stayed here briefly." The nurse's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Sarah Mitchell," she repeated softly, as if tasting the name, then a flicker of recognition. "Yes, I do remember her. It was odd. She arrived late one evening, unannounced, said she needed a place to rest for a few days, that she'd come from the convent." Emma leaned forward. "Do you remember why she came here, or what condition she was in?" Nancy's brow furrowed. She looked exhausted, pale, and there was a bandage on her left shoulder, high up, near the collarbone. Looked like a nasty wound. When I asked, she just said it was an accident, nothing more. The nurse's voice softened. "But she seemed frightened, jumpy, kept looking over her shoulder. After 3 nights, she left. No forwarding address, no goodbye." Emma's heart pounded. "Do you know if anyone from the convent came to see her?" Nancy shook her head. "No, but 2 men in plain clothes showed up the morning she left. Not priests, not police either. I remember because they asked if she had said anything unusual. We told them nothing, 'cause she hadn't, at least not to us." Emma's skin prickled. "Do you know who they were?" Nancy sighed. "No ID, no names, just official enough to make everyone nervous." Emma thanked the nurse profusely, her mind racing. Sarah had fled the convent wounded, frightened, and under surveillance. Someone had been determined to track her down, and official channels had scrubbed her trail. Driving back through the darkening streets, Emma couldn't shake the image of her friend, alone in a strange room, clutching her injured shoulder. What had she seen? What had driven her to run? And were those men still looking for her? As Emma pulled into her driveway, headlights briefly flared in her rearview mirror, a dark sedan slowing as it passed, then accelerating away. A chill ran down her spine. She hurried inside, bolted the door, and sat at the kitchen table, notebook open before her. The line seemed to pulse with new urgency. They forced me to leave because I saw what I should not have seen. The web of silence and omission was too deliberate, and if the men who came for Sarah 8 years ago were still watching, Emma's search had just put her squarely in their sights. Emma barely slept that night. The nurse's words echoed through her mind with an insistent thrum, blending with the unsettling memory of the dark sedan tailing her. At dawn, she forced herself out of bed, brewed a strong cup of coffee, and reviewed her notes. The pattern was becoming painfully clear. Sarah had not merely walked away from her vows. She had fled. Someone had wanted her gone and had worked hard to erase any trace of her after she left. But why? That was the question gnawing at Emma's gut. And there was still one person who might hold pieces of that answer: Sarah's father, Robert Mitchell. She found his number after some digging through old alumni records from St. Bridget's. Robert had been an involved parent during their academy years, a warm, intelligent man whose pride in Sarah had been obvious to anyone who saw them together. Emma hesitated for a long moment before dialing. The phone rang 3 times. "Hello?" A gruff, weary voice answered. Emma swallowed hard. "Mr. Mitchell, this is Emma Callahan. I was a friend of Sarah's from St. Bridget's." A pause. Then, voice strained. "Emma." "Yes, I remember you. Why are you calling?" Emma took a breath. "I found something. A notebook Sarah wrote in after she left. She said she was forced out. I'm trying to understand what happened." The line went silent for a beat. Then Robert exhaled sharply. "I always knew," he said bitterly. "Knew they weren't telling me the truth." His voice cracked with emotion. "I tried to see her, Emma. They wouldn't let me." Emma leaned forward. "What happened?" Robert's words came in halting bursts. "When I heard she was leaving, I drove to the convent, asked to speak with her, just for a few minutes. They refused, said she was under spiritual guidance and couldn't be disturbed. I argued, demanded to see her. They threatened to call the police if I didn't leave." Emma felt her chest tighten. "Did you report it?" "Filed a formal complaint with the diocese's office," Robert replied. "Wrote a letter. Never got a reply. When I followed up, they claimed no record of it existed. Said perhaps it was lost. Bullshit it. It was deliberate." His voice trembled with anger and grief. "After that, I gave up. I thought maybe Sarah had chosen to cut ties, but not a day's gone by I haven't wondered if she needed help." Emma's pulse quickened. "Do you still have a copy of that letter?" A bitter laugh. "I kept a copy in my desk for years. Then, during a move, it disappeared. I assumed I misplaced it. Now I wonder if someone didn't want me to have it." The words hung heavy in the air. Emma promised to keep him informed and ended the call with a mix of sorrow and resolve. Later that morning, she met Father Daniel at the rectory. His lined face looked more cautious than kind as he greeted her. "You said you found something?" Emma handed him the notebook, watching his expression shift from mild interest to grave concern. "I feared as much," he murmured, "but there is little I can do now." Emma pressed him. "Father, did you know about Robert's letter?" Daniel hesitated. "I heard whispers that Mr. Mitchell filed a complaint, but officially it was said to have never arrived." Emma's frustration bubbled over. "Don't you see, this was covered up. Someone is hiding what happened." Daniel sighed, voice weary. "Emma, be careful. The church is not always as transparent as it claims." Undeterred, Emma left the rectory and drove straight to St. Bridget's Academy. Though no longer a student, she still knew the layout well. The convent and academy shared a connected library, quiet, sun-dappled, a place Sarah had loved. If a copy of Robert's letter had survived anywhere, this was her best chance. The library was mostly empty, its high arched windows casting long shadows across the polished wood floors. Emma greeted the elderly librarian, Sister Agnes, who barely glanced up as Emma moved toward the theology section. Her heart pounded as she scanned the shelves. What was she even looking for? And then a memory surfaced. Sarah had once mentioned keeping certain keepsakes in old Bibles, tucked where no one would think to look. Emma's eyes darted across the spines until she spotted a worn King James Bible, one Sarah had loved for its poetic language. Fingers trembling, she pulled it down, flipped through its fragile pages, and gasped. Pressed between the Psalms was a folded piece of cream-colored stationery, edges yellowed with age. Emma unfolded it carefully. It was Robert Mitchell's letter, dated exactly 1 week after Sarah's forced departure. The text was direct, impassioned. "I demand an explanation as to why I was denied access to my daughter, Sister Sarah Mitchell, upon learning of her sudden removal from St. Bridget's Convent. I believe my daughter's rights, and mine as her father, have been violated. I request an immediate meeting to discuss this matter." The signature at the bottom was unmistakable. Emma's breath caught. This was proof not just of Robert's attempt, but of deliberate suppression. Someone had hidden this letter, buried it within sacred pages. But why? Her fingers traced the worn paper as questions multiplied. Who had placed it here? Why had it never reached the diocese's office? As she sat frozen with the letter in her lap, footsteps echoed faintly in the corridor outside the library, a slow, deliberate rhythm drawing closer. Ella froze as the deliberate footsteps echoed just outside the library's heavy oak doors. With trembling fingers, she quickly refolded Robert's letter and slid it back between the Bible's pages, determined to return for it once she was sure it was safe to take. She tucked the Bible under her arm and moved toward a nearby reading alcove, blinking into its shadowy recesses. The footsteps paused, the door creaked open slightly, and a tall figure appeared, Sister Agnes, her eyes scanning the room. Emma held her breath. After a tense moment, the nun retreated, the door clicking softly shut. Emma waited another beat, heart racing, before emerging from her hiding spot. Realizing she could not risk walking out with the Bible now, Emma carefully replaced it on the shelf, noting its exact position. With one last glance toward the door, she slipped out of the library and into the adjoining hallway. The encounter only deepened her certainty. Someone knew she was digging. Someone was watching. Later that afternoon, back in her aunt's house, Emma reviewed her next lead. Among Sarah's few surviving personal effects was an old photograph album Sarah had gifted Emma the year they graduated from St. Bridget's. Emma retrieved it from her suitcase, fingers moving through the familiar images, classrooms, gardens, chapel interiors, and fellow students caught in candid moments. Near the back of the album, a photo caught her eye. It showed Sarah in her novice habit, standing before a towering statue of St. Michael in the convent's side chapel, polishing its base with a soft cloth. Her expression was solemn, eyes lowered in concentration. Emma's gaze lingered on the image, a strange sense of unease prickling at her. She scanned the photograph more carefully, then leaned closer. There, protruding from the pocket of Sarah's apron, was a small rectangular object. Squinting, Emma retrieved her phone and snapped a high-resolution photo of the picture. Using her editing app, she enhanced the image and zoomed in. The object was unmistakable, a compact digital voice recorder, the kind used for discreetly capturing conversations. Emma's breath caught. Why would Sarah have carried such a device, especially while performing routine chapel duties? What had she been trying to record? And had that recording played a role in whatever she had witnessed, and in her subsequent expulsion? Emma's mind churned. She recalled that the side chapel, informally known as the Guardian's Chapel, had been closed for months after Sarah's disappearances. The official notice cited urgent maintenance due to a burst pipe beneath the flooring. Emma remembered the odd timing, as well as whispers that the closure had been unusually long for such a repair. Determined to follow the thread, Emma reached out to Michael Russo, a retired plumber who had serviced many of the older buildings in town, including those of the academy and convent. They had met once, through a family gathering, and Emma hoped he would be candid. She called his number, explained her inquiry, and after a moment's pause, he agreed to meet her at a local diner later that day. Over steaming cups of coffee in a corner booth, Emma showed him a printed copy of the chapel closure notice she had found online, dated 6 months after Sarah's disappearances. Michael frowned as he read. "That's strange," he said, rubbing his chin. "I never got a work order for that job, and trust me, I would have remembered. The plumbing under that chapel is a nightmare. Ancient lead pipes, brittle joints. They'd have needed someone with experience." Emma's pulse quickened. "Are you sure?" she pressed. Michael nodded firmly. "Positive. I've been the go-to guy for the convent's plumbing for years. If they hired someone else, it wasn't through any of the local firms." He leaned back, eyes narrowing. "In fact, now that you mention it, around that time I did hear a rumor some of the maintenance staff said there were people coming and going late at night. Not contractors, churchmen. And the chapel was kept locked up tight the whole time." Emma's mind raced. A voice recorder in Sarah's pocket, a sudden chapel closure, unofficial nighttime visitors. It was no burst pipe that had prompted the 6-month lockdown. Something had happened in that space, something Sarah may have recorded, and someone had wanted to erase every trace of it. Thanking Michael for his time, Emma left the diner with a new sense of urgency. If Sarah's voice recorder still existed, if the recording had survived, then it was the key to understanding what had driven her friend into hiding. But first, Emma needed to know what exactly Sarah had been doing in that chapel during her final days at the convent. She needed answers, fast. Emma sat in her aunt's living room, the dim afternoon light filtering through the faded curtains. The conversation with Michael Russo had left her shaken but more determined than ever. Whatever had happened in the Guardian's chapel had been deliberate, orchestrated to cover up something Sarah had discovered, or perhaps recorded. But who was involved, and more importantly, who was still ensuring the truth remained buried? As she stared at the notebook again, Sarah's warning line burned in her mind. Emma knew she couldn't proceed alone. She called Father Daniel, carefully choosing her words, hinting at what she had found, but not revealing everything. To her surprise, his voice carried a new undercurrent of worry. "Emma," he said slowly, "you may be treading on dangerous ground. You should know, something has just happened at the convent." Emma's breath caught. There was a novice, Sister Catherine, very devoted. About a week ago, she began speaking privately with Father Lucian. Daniel's voice dropped. "An old priest, recently assigned to the convent. No one knows much about him." Catherine became withdrawn, agitated, and 2 days ago she abruptly requested to leave the order, personal reasons, they said. But no one has seen her since. Emma gripped the phone tightly. "Did she say anything to anyone?" Daniel hesitated. "Only to Sister Agnes, briefly. Apparently, Catherine left a note in her quarters. Sister Agnes confided in me, though she's frightened. I shouldn't be telling you this." Emma paused. Emma whispered, "It said Sarah was right. They know. I'm scared." The words sent a chill down Emma's spine. A new disappearances. Another young nun echoing Sarah's fears. Whatever the threat was, it hadn't ended with Sarah's departure. It was happening again. Emma's mind raced. Who was this Father Lucian? How was he connected to the forces that had silenced Sarah? And what had Catherine uncovered during those whispered conversations? Determined, Emma asked Daniel if he could arrange access to the convent. After a tense exchange, he reluctantly agreed to meet her outside the gates the next morning, promising to do what he knew. "Be cautious," he warned. "If they know you're asking questions, you could be in danger." That night, sleep eluded Emma. The pattern was undeniable. Sarah had recorded something in the chapel, triggering her expulsion and the subsequent cover-up. Now, years later, Catherine had evidently stumbled upon the same hidden truth, or had been told enough by Father Lucian to understand its danger. And just like Sarah, she had vanished. The next morning, Emma met Father Daniel beneath the towering iron gates of the convent. His face was pale, eyes shadowed with worry. "I convinced them you're an alumna researching convent history," he said quietly. "You'll be allowed into the library and common areas, but no further." Emma nodded. Inside, the convent felt eerily unchanged. Ancient stone corridors, flickering candlelight, the faint scent of incense. But beneath the surface, a palpable tension hung in the air. Sisters passed Emma with downcast eyes, their movements hurried. In the library, Emma quickly located Sister Agnes, who looked visibly shaken. After a hushed introduction, "Please, you can trust me." "What happened?" Agnes glanced around nervously before pulling Emma into a side alcove. "She was terrified," the elderly nun whispered. She kept saying Sarah was right, that the same thing was happening again. Emma's heart pounded, and again Emma note Agnes nodded, and, after a moment's hesitation, produced a small folded slip of paper from her sleeve. She handed it to Emma with trembling fingers. Emma unfolded it carefully. In rushed, uneven handwriting were the chilling words. "Sarah was right. They know. I'm scared." Emma's throat tightened. This was no coincidence. The forces that had driven Sarah into hiding had resurfaced, and with terrifying precision. As she carefully refolded the note, footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. "Go," she whispered urgently. "They mustn't find us talking." Emma slipped the note into her notebook and hurried back to the library's main hall. Her mind spun with questions. Who was orchestrating this? What secret was so dangerous that two young nuns, years apart, had been silenced over it? And was Father Lucien merely a messenger, or something far more sinister? As Emma left the convent under Father Daniel's watchful gaze, her resolve hardened. She had followed Sarah's trail this far. Now another voice had joined the chorus of fear. She would not turn back, not when the truth was this close. Emma stepped out of the convent gates, her pulse still racing. The weight of Catherine's note pressed heavily in her pocket, its message reverberating in her mind with chilling clarity. Sarah was right. They know. "I'm scared." The pattern of fear was undeniable now, and it seemed to point to forces far larger and more shadowed than Emma had first imagined. As she drove through the quiet streets of Middlebury, her mind churned with unanswered questions. The connection between Sarah and Catherine was clear, but what was the thread tying them together? Who or what was behind this pattern of vanishing voices? That evening she sat once again at her aunt's dining table, the familiar notebook open before her. Sarah's words, the faded photo of her with the voice recorder, the suspicious chapel closure, and now Catherine's disappearance, all pointed to a secret carefully hidden for years. Emma needed more witnesses, more cracks in the wall of silence surrounding the convent. One name surfaced in her memory: Paul Granger, the long-surfaced gatekeeper of St. Bridget's. Paul had been a fixture at the convent's entrance, a stoic figure with deep-set eyes who knew every face that passed through the iron gates. Years ago, when Sarah vanished, Paul had told authorities and Sarah's father that he hadn't seen her leave, that no vehicle or visitor had escorted her away. But Emma wondered, had that version of events changed under new pressure? The next morning she drove to Paul's modest home on the outskirts of town. The house sat hunched beneath tall oaks, its paint weathered, windows shuttered. Emma parked out front and approached the porch. When she knocked, the door creaked open a crack, and Paul's wary eyes peered out. He looked older than Emma remembered, hair thinner, face deeply lined. Paul's gaze sharpened, suspicion flickering across his features. "I told the police everything, back then," he said gruffly. "Didn't see her go, that's all." Emma stepped closer, voice low and steady. "I found new information, Mr. Granger. I know something happened that night, and I believe you do too." For a long moment Paul stared at her, inner conflict etched into his face. Then, with a sigh that seemed to deflate him, he opened the door fully. "Come in," he muttered. Inside, the house smelled faintly of tobacco and old wood. Paul led her to a cramped sitting room and eased himself into a worn armchair. Emma waited silently as he lit a cigarette with trembling fingers. "You're right," he said finally, exhaling a cloud of smoke. "I lied." Emma's breath caught. "But I never could shake the guilt." Emma leaned forward, heart pounding. "What really happened?" Paul's eyes clouded with memory. That night, about 2 a.m, a black van pulled up to the side gate. Not the main one. 2 men handed me an envelope. Money. Told me to stay in my booth and forget what I saw. Emma's voice was barely a whisper. "Did you see Sarah?" Paul nodded slowly. "They brought her out, hooded, like a prisoner. She was limp, like she'd been drugged or hurt. They put her in the van and drove off." Emma's stomach twisted. "Did you get a look at the license plate?" Paul's gaze sharpened. "I never forgot it. NY2JX 839. His voice broke. "It's haunted me every damn day." Emma scribbled the number down, her fingers shaking. "Have you told anyone?" Paul shook his head. "After what happened to me the week after? No." Emma frowned. "What happened?" Paul's face hardened. "Someone broke into my house. No robbery, just a message. My dog poisoned, my tools smashed, a note left on my table. Silence is safety. Emma's skin prickled. This was bigger than she had dared believe. Carefully, she reassured Paul, promised to keep his name out of it, and left with the license plate number burning in her mind. Back at her aunt's house, Emma immediately pulled up public records databases, scouring for any trace of the plate. The results came quickly and sent a chill through her bones. The van, once registered to a shell company in New York, had been flagged in a federal investigation 5 years ago for suspected involvement in human trafficking and illegal transport of undocumented immigrants. The case had gone cold, records sealed, ownership untraceable. Emma sat back, stunned. Why would the same vehicle be used to spirit Sarah away from a Vermont convent? What connection existed between this underground network and the church's cover-up? The layers of deception were multiplying, and now the danger felt more immediate than ever. But if that van had been used to move Sarah, perhaps it had been used again. Perhaps Catherine's fate was tangled in its web. Emma sat motionless in her aunt's kitchen, eyes fixed on the screen in front of her. The van's license plate had led to a dead end, cloaked in federal red tape, but it was enough to confirm what her gut had already suspected. Sarah's disappearances was not an isolated act by frightened church officials. It was part of something deeper, more organized, something designed to operate in the shadows. And now, with Catherine's note and Paul's confession, Emma knew she had to go further back into the convent's history if she hoped to uncover the truth. It was nearly midnight when she made the decision. Grabbing her coat and Sarah's notebook, Emma drove back to St. Bridget's Academy, parking down the block under cover of darkness. The library's side entrance had once been a poorly guarded service door, rarely used. Emma found it unchanged, the old lock still vulnerable to the small tension wrench she had learned to use in college. Minutes later, she was inside, moving swiftly through the dim corridors until she reached the archive room, an old, rarely accessed section behind the main library stacks. The air was musty, heavy with the scent of paper and dust. Rows of filing cabinets and ancient ledgers stood like silent sentries. Emma worked quickly, scanning the labels until her eyes landed on what she needed: St. Bridget's Convent Architectural Plans, 192101, 960. Her fingers trembled as she slid the drawer open and began pulling out the large, brittle sheets. One by one, she unfolded them on the nearest table, tracing the familiar outlines of the convent: the chapel, dormitories, dining hall, administrative wing. Her pulse quickened as she spotted a plan labeled Basement Level at 1953 Revision. Carefully, she unrolled it and leaned in. There it was, a small, square room nestled beneath the east wing, with a narrow corridor leading to it from the main basement. It was labeled simply Storage/Utility, but something about its placement didn't add up. Emma knew from recent blueprints that the east wing had no basement access, at least none documented. She pulled out her phone and cross-referenced a digital copy of the current plans she had downloaded earlier. The modern schematics showed no such room. It had been erased. Emma's breath caught. Why hide a small underground room unless there was something about it that couldn't withstand scrutiny? Her mind raced with implications, and then, almost as an afterthought, she flipped open Sarah's notebook to review the final entries once more. Near the last written page, in faint, hurried script, Sarah had scrawled a chilling line Emma had somehow overlooked. "They said if I talked, the underground room won't stay quiet forever." Emma's hands trembled as she read it again. The underground room. Sarah had known about it, had feared what it held, or what had happened there, and someone had threatened her to ensure her silence. The puzzle pieces were snapping into place with terrifying clarity. The suspicious chapel closure, the vanishing young nuns, the van next to human trafficking, and now an erased room beneath the convent, linked to Sarah's final warning. Whatever lay beneath the east wing was central to the conspiracy that had silenced Sarah and now Catherine. Emma copied the basement blueprint onto her phone, then carefully refolded the original and replaced it. As she prepared to leave, a faint creak echoed from the far end of the archive room. Heart pounding, Emma extinguished her flashlight and pressed herself against a shelf. Footsteps approached, slow and deliberate. She held her breath as a shadow passed between the rows. It lingered for a moment, then retreated, the door clinking softly shut behind her. Emma waited another full minute before moving again, slipping out of the archive room and retracing her steps to the service door. Outside, the cold night air hit her like a slap. Emma leaned against the brick wall, struggling to steady her breathing. The room was real. Sarah had known it too. But what had Sarah witnessed there? What was so terrible that the convent would go to such lengths to erase all trace of it? Her phone buzzed, shattering the stillness. It was a message from Father Daniel. One line only. Be careful. They're watching. Emma's blood ran cold. Emma barely slept that night. The image of the erased underground room haunted her, intertwining with the ominous words Sarah had scrawled in her final notebook entry. The underground room won't stay quiet forever. The phrase throbbed in her mind like a warning bell. She spent hours poring over everything she had gathered, the license plate tied to human trafficking, the forced silence of Paul Granger, the cryptic note left by Sister Catherine, and now this hidden room beneath the convent. But one clue remained unresolved, one thread she couldn't let go of. The voice recorder Sarah had carried in that photograph. If it had survived, it could contain the one piece of irrefutable evidence Emma needed. As dawn broke pale and cold, Emma called David Mercer, an old college friend who now worked in digital forensics. A self-proclaimed audio geek, David owed her more than a few favors. After a rushed explanation, Emma asked if he could meet. David agreed to clear his afternoon. "Bring everything you've got," he said. "If there's anything left on the device, I'll find it." Emma spent the morning back in the library under the guise of her alumna research project, subtly questioning staff and browsing through old lost and found logs. Her patience paid off when Sister Agnes, pale and nervous, quietly slipped her a small cloth pouch. "I think this is what you're looking for," the elderly nun whispered. Emma's hands trembled as she opened the pouch. Inside was a battered, dust-covered digital recorder, the very one she had seen in the photograph. With a whispered thanks, Emma hurried out of the convent and drove straight to David's lab. The small basement workspace buzzed with machines and screens. David greeted her with a hug and a wry smile. "You always did bring me the weirdest puzzles," he said. Emma handed him the recorder, voice tight. "David, this could be life or death. I need whatever's on it." David's demeanor shifted instantly. He examined the device, frowning. "Looks old, pretty corroded, but if the memory's intact, I can pull something." He set to work, connecting the recorder to an interface and launching a suite of recovery tools. Emma paced the small room, nerves raw. After nearly an hour of tense silence, David leaned back, eyes wide. "There's something here," he said. "Most of it's corrupted, but I've salvaged one fragment. It's short, about 90 seconds. Want her to hear it?" Emma swallowed hard. "Yes, play it." David clicked a button. A burst of static crackled through the speakers, then a faint background hum. The first clear sound was a low male voice chanting Latin prayers, half whispered, half intoned. The voice grew louder, more urgent. Then came a sharp metallic clang, followed by dragging sounds, metal scraping across stone. Emma's breath caught. In her mind, she saw the hidden underground room, cold and dark. The next sounds were of hurried footsteps, a woman's ragged breathing, Sarah's, and muffled, quarreling voices. Suddenly, a harsh male voice rang out, cutting through the confusion. "She can't see this. She's one of the pure ones." Emma's heart stopped. The voice was chilling, authoritative, filled with both menace and reverence. More screaming followed, and then static swallowed the rest. David sat back, visibly shaken. "Emma? What the hell was that?" Emma's mind reeled. The phrase burned into her consciousness. "She can't see this. She's one of the pure ones." They had spared Sarah, barely, but had also made sure she was silenced. The dragging sounds, the prayers, the metal, it all pointed to something ritualistic, something they wanted hidden forever beneath the convent. She turned to David, voice low but urgent. "Can you clean this up? Enhance it? I need every word, every sound." David nodded. "I can try, but Emma, you need to be careful. If this is tied to what I think it is, people kill to keep these kinds of secrets." Emma's jaw tightened. "They already have." As David returned to work, Emma stepped into the hallway. Mind racing, the fragment proved everything. Sarah had been there, had witnessed something unspeakable, and had recorded it. And now Emma had the one piece of evidence the hidden forces within the convent couldn't erase. But with that knowledge came danger. Because if she could hear this tape, so could they. Emma left David's lab with the cleaned audio file loaded onto an encrypted drive. The words she had heard refused to fade. She can't see this. She's one of the pure ones. The metallic dragging, the breathless panic in Sarah's captured voice, it all confirmed her worst fears. The underground room had witnessed something terrible, something powerful enough to force Sarah into hiding and silence others in its wake. But for Emma, one piece of the puzzle still remained opaque. She needed someone who had been inside the official process, someone who might have seen firsthand how the Convent's cover-up had unfolded in those critical hours after Sarah disappeared. That night, unable to sleep, she sat at her aunt's kitchen table, scrolling through archived local news reports. In a small mention buried in a years-old article, she found it. Authorities called to St. Bridget's Convent to mediate reports of an internal disturbance. No injuries reported. Incident resolved peacefully. The phrasing was sanitized, almost scripted. Emma cross-referenced the date with Sarah's disappearances. It matched perfectly. Determined, Emma reached out to an old contact, Noah Reyes, a former journalist who had covered local police for the Middlebury Gazette before moving to Boston. Noah responded within the hour. "I remember that night," he said over the phone. "Was told it was a false alarm, but I always thought it smelled wrong. The responding officer was a guy named Sam Harlow. Retired a few years back, quiet type. If anyone knows more, it's him." With Noah's help, Emma tracked Sam down to a modest home on the outskirts of town. The next morning, after a restless night, she stood on his porch, heart pounding as she knocked. Moments later, the door opened. A wiry man in his 60s with sharp eyes and a slight limp regarded her cautiously. "Mr. Harlow," Emma began, "I'm Emma Callahan. I know this is out of the blue, but I need to ask about the night you responded to St. Bridget's Convent 8 years ago." Harlow's eyes narrowed. "Why now?" "Because the truth about what happened to Sister Sarah Mitchell was buried. I think you saw part of it. I need your help." For a long moment, Harlow studied her. Then he exhaled heavily and opened the door wider. "Come in." Inside, amidst shelves of old detective novels and framed family photos, Harlow poured them both coffee. He remained silent until Emma showed him the audio clip, letting him hear the chilling voice and metallic dragging. When it ended, he rubbed his jaw, eyes dark. "I knew it," he muttered. "Knew something was off that night." Emma leaned forward. "Please, tell me what you saw." Harlow sighed. "We got a call labeled as an internal disturbance, wording that usually meant domestic spat or drunk priest causing trouble. But when we got there, the place was on edge. 2 priests met us, both too polite, too hearsed. They kept insisting it was a misunderstanding, no need for us to look around." "But you did?" Emma pressed. Harlow nodded. "I insisted. Took a walk through the public areas. Then I noticed a side stairwell behind the chapel, one I hadn't known existed. The air reeked, iron, something metallic. On the lower steps I found blood, thick drops smeared along the edge." Emma's throat tightened. "What did they say?" "One of the priests claimed it was from a stray cat they'd found injured, said they were just cleaning up. But here's the thing. When I asked to review their security footage to confirm no one unauthorized had been there, they claimed the cameras were down for maintenance that night. All of them." Emma's eyes widened. "All cameras?" Harlow's voice grew grim. "Exactly. Convenient, isn't it? Cameras fail, blood on the stairs, but no injured cat was ever produced. They stonewalled us after that, and when I filed my report 2 days later, my captain called me in, told me to drop it. Said higher-ups had deemed it a closed matter." Emma's heart pounded. "And the report," Harlow shook his head, "pulled from the system. I checked a year later, no trace. Officially, that call never happened." Emma sat back, stunned. The threads were tightening around the same event. Sarah had witnessed something in that hidden room, captured it on tape. Blood had been spilled. The church's machinery had moved swiftly to scrub every trace, including the official record. Hart watched her carefully. "I don't know what you're chasing," he said quietly, "but be careful. These people have long arms. They don't want this dragged into the light." Emma's voice was steady. "It's too late for that now." Emma left Sam Harlow's house with her heart pounding harder than it had since the beginning of this investigation. Each thread she had pulled, Sarah's vanished record, the erased basement room, the audio proof of something unspeakable beneath the convent, the blood-stained stairs, and the silent, unseen forces that had manipulated police records had led her deeper into a labyrinth of fear and silence. But now, with all the evidence pointing in one direction, Emma knew what she had to do. If Sarah had survived, if she had gone into hiding, there had to be someone who knew where she was. Emma spent the next 2 days cross-referencing every name Sarah had ever mentioned in her notebook and letters, focusing on those connected to shelters, religious retreats, or exile communities. That was when the name Father Thomas Keller surfaced again and again. Once a priest at a rural Oregon parish known for taking in those seeking refuge, Keller had abruptly resigned 2 years after Sarah's disappearance and relocated to a remote area near Ashland, Oregon, where he now managed a small, unofficial sanctuary for ex-clergy and abused survivors. Emma booked the first flight to Oregon. From there, she drove hours through winding mountain roads, the thick pines swallowing the sunlight as she approached the modest retreat compound nestled among the trees. The wooden sign simply read, "Sancta Anima," weathered by wind and time. Emma parked her rental car and approached the main house, heart hammering. Inside, an elderly nun with kind eyes greeted her cautiously. Emma identified herself and explained that she was looking for Sarah Mitchell, an old friend she believed might be here. The nun's expression flickered with something between surprise and wariness. "Wait here," she said softly. After a long, tense wait, footsteps echoed on the wooden floor. Then, from around the corner, Father Keller himself appeared, older, gaunt, but with sharp eyes that missed nothing. He studied Emma in silence for a moment before speaking. "Why have you come?" Emma chose her words carefully, her voice steady. "I know what happened to Sarah. I've uncovered enough to know the truth was buried. I don't want to harm her. I just need to see her. She deserves to know someone still cares." Keller's gaze searched her for signs of deception. Finally, with a slow nod, he gestured for her to follow. They moved through a narrow corridor and out into a small-dappled courtyard where a small group of women tended a garden in near silence. Among them, kneeling by a row of lavender bushes, was Sarah. Emma stopped cold. Though thinner, paler, and marked by lines of deep sorrow, there was no mistaking her. Father Keller spoke softly. "She has not spoken a word since the night she arrived here, nearly 8 years ago. We don't know if it's trauma or choice, but she writes sometimes." Emma's throat tightened. Slowly she approached. Sarah looked up, her blue eyes widening in recognition. Tears sprang to Emma's eyes as she knelt beside her friend. "Sarah, it's me, Emma. I've been looking for you." Sarah trembled, her gaze flickering with emotion, but her lips did not move. After a moment, she reached for a small slate board and a piece of chalk she kept by her side. With a shaking hand, she scrawled 7 words, "Tell them." Not all prayers were answered. Emma swallowed a sob. The meaning was devastatingly clear. Whatever had happened in that underground room had shattered Sarah's faith, and her voice, but her will remained. Emma gently took Sarah's hand, promising, "I will tell them. I won't let this be buried." Emma spent the next 2 hours sitting with Sarah, telling her everything she had discovered, every piece of the puzzle Emma had uncovered. Sarah listened intently, her grip tightening whenever Emma described the blood on the stairs, the van, or the recovered audio. When Emma finally rose to leave, she promised again, "You are not alone anymore." As she drove down the long gravel path leading away from Sancta Anima, Emma's thoughts churned with everything she needed to do next. The audio recording, the erased police files, Sarah's living testimony. She had the means to expose what had been done. But even as determination filled her, a new sense of unease prickled her skin. At the base of the mountain road, a black van with no plates sat idling at a crossroads. Emma's heart stilled. As she slowed to pass, she glanced sideways. Behind the tinted glass, she caught a fleeting glimpse of a face, gaunt, hollow-eyed, unmistakable. Father Lucien, the mysterious priest whose arrival had preceded Sister Catherine's disappearances, the man rumored to have been swiftly relocated after a scandal that no one dared name. Emma's breath caught. The van pulled out behind her, following at a measured distance. The message was clear. They knew she had found Sarah. And they were watching. But as Emma gripped the steering wheel tighter, her resolve only hardened. They might be watching. But this time, she was ready to be seen. Before we continue sharing more stories like this one, don't forget to hit subscribe and give this video a like if you found it gripping. And tell me, which part of Sarah's story gave you chills the most? Was it the underground room, the blood on the stairs, or her final written words? Also, where are you watching from? I love seeing how far these stories travel. Share your city or country in the comments below, and stay tuned. We have more to uncover.